if the protesters at this point, retreat and go home, are they going to be getting sort of repercussions down the road, or are you going to be sort of actively pursuing the people that you've been sort of documenting and filming who are still out there protesting? What are your plans?
If you are involved in this protest, we will actively look to identify you and follow up with financial sanctions and criminal charges. Absolutely. This investigation will go on for months to come.
Now, people don't mind when you point out the tyranny that has happened in other countries, but most have a hard time viewing their own country, their own government, and their own law enforcers in any sort of objective way. Having been trained to feel a blind loyalty to the ruling class of the particular piece of dirt they live on, also known as patriotism, and having been trained to believe that obedience is a virtue, the idea of forcibly resisting law enforcement is simply unthinkable to many, and humanity has suffered horribly because of it. It is a testament to the effectiveness of authoritarian indoctrination that literally billions of people throughout history have begged and screamed and cried in the face of authoritarian injustice and oppression, but only a tiny fraction have ever actually lifted a finger to try to stop it.
Every single law that is passed by these governors and senators that violate the Constitution are love letters to Santa without men and women in badges willing to enforce them on innocent people. Every single cop does this knowingly and consciously all the time. Every cop is a criminal, without exception. Many of them are nice people. Many of them are smart people. They're all criminals.
I'm saying we don't get reform that way. Let's change the laws.
I don't believe in reform. I believe in abolition.
When they try to change, you can say no, free me.
Fucking sleazebags. Get a real fucking job. I've lost the idea. Fucking sack the goddamn shit. Razor check. Guys, the media is the virus. You guys disgusting.
Welcome to Toxic Airwaves. The media is the virus, and we are watching the Stanford prison experiment play out in real time. It's very obvious. I think all cops essentially are a live reenactment of the Stanford prison experiment, but we're watching it in a very brutal way tonight. But yeah, got Skeef on Spaces, driving in the middle of nowhere, bad service tonight. How you doing, Skeef?
I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah. Man, that Michael Malice quote is pretty solid. And I think that's, I don't know, we were talking a little bit about leftists, but typically the people on the right tend to be the big supporters of Back the Blue. And it's been interesting to watch the last couple of years as their two political stances kind of conflict with each other in a very obvious way. But yeah. You got any thoughts on that, Skeef?
I think, yeah, I guess I would agree with a lot of what people were saying earlier. It's going to be interesting to see like how people of all different kinds of worldviews come to realize that like the ability to enforce coercion is going away fast. And so like if I find myself in a conversation with somebody who's, you know, a political leftist or something like that, and they want to talk about Bitcoin, typically what I tell them is that something to the effect of, it's like, if your worldview relies on coercion and control, then its influence and power is just going to trend to zero as Bitcoin trends to infinity. And I don't know what the medium term looks like, but I see a lot of these things kind of sorting themselves out long term.
Yeah. If you're listening to this and you don't have your Bitcoin off the exchange, you should probably turn this off and go rethink your life. The stuff happening in Canada right now it's a wake-up call, and I think we're watching the Then They Fight You stage come in real quickly right now. And it's pretty interesting. But yeah, I I almost put a clip of were you guys able to hear the very end of the intro where the people are yelling at the MSNBC reporter, calling him scum?
Not really. Not exactly what they were.
Gotcha. Yeah, I had some issues with getting that sound. It wouldn't let me download the video for some reason, but so I just took a screen recording. But I think that's the proper way to handle these people, these maniacs. See, we got Pled in the chat. Canada is essentially mandating the private sector companies to be proxy force to fight the protesters for them. They're using insurance companies, banks to press citizens. Oh, and on top of that, they were shutting down coffee shops that served the protesters. All the Bitcoiners called Kraken CEO Jesse Powell a hero for his tweet, but he is no hero. Kraken and the other exchanges should not be complicit in oppressing Canadians. Yeah, I mean, that's how I feel about KYC laws, period. I think KYC laws are a massive issue, and I think one of the things that I made it my mission for 2022 is trying to help people provide or find ways to route around the KYC laws and use Bitcoin. I think the way that it's meant to be, like, we don't need gatekeepers in Bitcoin. You can mine at home. We can set up Azteco terminals everywhere. You know, we can do all of these things that don't allow for KYC laws. And so the exchanges have been complicit in that, which I think is, you know, equally as awful because it sets the stage for all of the other nonsense. So, you know, there's some truth to that, but I think that it falls on our shoulders as Bitcoiners to take responsibility for that. Like, the exchanges will do what they do, but I don't really see a place for exchanges in the future.
Well, the thing is that the KYC laws are not bad for individual Bitcoin. They're bad for exchanges. This is why a lot of exchanges freak out about KYC laws, more so than I think the Bitcoin community. I think exchanges want to rally, you know, individual Bitcoin users to come to their defense. To be honest, if an exchange is upset about a law being passed, I'm not going to go out there and lobby for them. They can hire their own lobbyists. You know, it's not my problem. I can figure out a way to get Bitcoin. I can figure out a way to get non-KYC Bitcoin. And I don't use exchanges as laws, so most of these laws wouldn't affect me at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, too.
If you use your exchange account as your Bitcoin wallet, first of all, you're already fucked. You're already doing something wrong. Not wrong morally, but you're doing something wrong because you're not using Bitcoin like the way it's supposed to be used. So if there's a law that makes that more difficult to happen, not necessarily a bad thing, or maybe that's just a contrarian opinion, but that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, all of this stuff is accelerating us towards a real hyper-Bitcoinized future because Bitcoin is the escape hash, and they're pushing more and more people towards that escape hash. And so people are starting to, you know, reconsider the tools that they're using and their basic, you know, security in general. That's an interesting point, too. You still there, Skeeve? Or did you drop?
Yeah. I fucked up. Okay, so the real story is I fucked up the autopilot on my car and it was yelling at me, so I had to actually drive for a little bit.
So you don't have to stop and restart it.
Yeah, and the little snitch makes me put it in park before I can use the toy again.
Skeeve, don't put your life in Elon Musk's hands, please.
Speaking of Tesla, there's all these like KYC car laws coming forward in the sense of like having, well, I wouldn't necessarily call it KYC, but massive surveillance with kill switches and cameras that are being mandated to be put in cars by, I think it's like 2026. And what do you guys think the reaction to that is going to be from the average person?
Oh, I'm already looking at diesel Land Cruisers from like the 80s or so.
I mean, you can't buy a regular TV anymore. Yeah, all TVs that are sold are smart TVs. Hence, I don't own a TV, which, you know, but yeah, I don't know. Most consumers would probably not mind. Most people aren't really privacy minded. But I went into a local Staples store and I bought a laptop from there, and the laptop had an actual shutter for the camera. I'd never seen that. Built in, and it's an actual switch that you can just a physical switch that you pull and it covers up the camera. Now, of course, there's probably 100 other sensors on that laptop, but I guess it's enough of a thing that some companies are starting to cater to a privacy mindset. So most people think nobody cares about privacy, but some people do a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just about how quickly things move, and which upsets the average person. And I think going from no cameras in the cars to mandatory cameras in the cars is a very, very quick jump that a lot of people will not be able to handle.
And a big event could easily push, I don't know, like some big breach about what's done with the data or something like that. I wasn't super optimistic that anything would come of all the Canada stuff, but it's like I'm seeing a lot of, I don't know, it's still anecdotal data at this point, but it seems like a lot of evidence that a lot of Canadians are moving a significant amount of their money into Bitcoin because they've realized how fragile everything they've relied on for the last, their entire life is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really good news about Bitcoin out there, which I don't think most people, even Bitcoiners, are paying much attention to. One of them was this is sort of off topic for what we're talking about right now, but the fact that a mining company, a big institutional mining company, has negotiated with the power grid to kind of modulate when they are using power based on to kind of make the power more stable is a huge deal, and I think that that's great for Bitcoin. That's great for Bitcoin mining. Another thing is the fact that the only people apparently who got money to the truckers, other than people who just went out there and handed them $100 bills, were Bitcoiners. Say what you want. There's a lot of criticism that went out to the fundraiser, but those guys actually went out there and actually handed out the envelopes full of private keys and instructions. And no matter what the Canadian government did, they couldn't stop these guys from taking a backpack full of envelopes out there and handing out Bitcoin to these truckers. And that was just amazing to see. You orange pilled a bunch of truckers. You were able to get them the money that people donated. If you're a Bitcoiner, that's a very proud moment, in my opinion. You should be very proud because we were able to, whether you donated or not, Bitcoin was able to help these guys when no one else could.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what the ramifications of that long term are. I'm pretty bullish on that. I mean, I just, like, I think the most powerful thing isn't necessarily, like, I think the most powerful thing that Bitcoin can provide is creating these circular economies and these networks of people using it. And it doesn't have to be McDonald's accepting Bitcoin to get there, but it's situations like that that are extremely disruptive of people circumventing the system and realizing this doesn't work. I need to opt out and I need to do it quick.
I mean, Bitcoin was created because every other private monetary system was shut down by the government. Every single time a private monetary system sprung up, the government figured out a way to shut it down. So Bitcoin itself was a reaction to that. You got to figure out a way to do private money without, making it be able to shut down. It can't be centralized. And every single attack on Bitcoin kind of helps Bitcoin. That's the funny thing is, and a friend of mine, Bitcoin Mechanic, which some of you guys may know, he says he wants the government to come after Bitcoin. Now, I know that's a controversial position to take, but his reasoning is that if the government doesn't come after Bitcoin, then Bitcoin it doesn't kind of build itself up to be resistant to that kind of an attack. And what's happening in Canada is extremely bullish for Bitcoin, in my opinion. Again, we do have to see what happens long term, but so far it looks like a huge success. And the more they crack down, the better Bitcoin looks. you can, if those coffee shops are serving truckers out there, and if someone can start accepting Bitcoin, who knows?
Yeah. I think that's an argument that we took months ago, is that it's better for the governments to crack down on Bitcoin in the short term than this slow process of, trying to make it as difficult and regulatory as possible. I think it just expedites hyper Bitcoinization ultimately.
I guess that's the boiling frog argument. Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, I mean, Ephesians, you kind of had a interesting theory on SHA-256 CBDCs. You want to talk about that a little bit? No, maybe.
May not.
Did you see that?
It's probably
picture?
away from you.
Sorry, I was.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
No, I was saying I'm just wrapping up a little bit of working out. Just give me a minute. I'll be back.
Well, I saw Ephesians' tweet. I'd like to hear what he has to say about it. I don't think it's an issue, just because it just seems like a worse version of Bitcoin Cash. Bitcoin Cash was an attack on Bitcoin because it used the exact same mining algorithm as Bitcoin. But the problem is that most altcoins don't use the same mining algorithm as Bitcoin for good reason, because then Bitcoin miners could easily attack that chain. Bitcoin Cash used the same mining algorithm, thinking that they were going to be able to get most of the miners on their chain, and that didn't work out. The motivation was just too great to just keep mining on Bitcoin, even if the government says this is better and all that stuff. Again, the CBDC would be just a worse version of Bitcoin Cash. It would be like a Bitcoin Cash without moving the UTXOs over. At least Bitcoin Cash moved the UTXOs over, which a CBDC wouldn't even do.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because that would be a complete nightmare for any particular country to do that, because there's so much incentive for, like, with the distribution of hash rate to go and attack that, and it'd be amazing. I mean, I just don't see the central bank digital currency being issued on anything but a centralized server that they have absolute control over, and calling it blockchain personally.
Well, my take with the Twitter post was just like, if the central banks come to terms with the fact that, like, Bitcoin very well may obsolete them, it would be in their interest to attack it whatever the most savvy way possible is, regardless of what their personal incentives or what they'd like to do, their preferences or whatever. Like, if it were the case, and I'm not enough of a big brain to know whether or not this makes sense, but my take was just, if it were the case that it would make sense for the Fed to issue a CBDC on SHA-256 so people with Bitcoin ASICs could mine it, they could theoretically incentivize a huge percentage of the hash rate away from Bitcoin mining to FedCoin or whatever. And then the network hash rate of Bitcoin would collapse by enough that they would then be able to redirect that hash back at Bitcoin, but with like a malicious hard fork. That was basically the concern in a nutshell.
The number one objection that people were saying to Ephesians was that the government wouldn't do that because their argument for going, away from Bitcoin is the environmental argument. And if they're just moving the mining over, then that argument goes away. But I don't think that that's necessarily a great objection. The government, will say one thing and do something else, which doesn't even make sense all the time. I mean, so that's not even the main objection. My main objection was it's kind of sort of already been done. I mean, there's people out there, and I kind of agree with these people who say that Bitcoin Cash was a sophisticated state attack on Bitcoin. I mean, I don't know for sure that it was, but maybe I would argue it wasn't, just because it was too smart. Like, the state maybe isn't even brilliant enough to come up with that type of attack. But it just seems like it was, it had the backing. It had backing from some big mining pools in China. It had the backing from a guy who is a famous libertarian who goes to libertarian events all the time. And I don't think Roger Ver is a Fed, but I mean, who knows? He could be. He has been in the in the federal system. So has Calvin Ayre, by the way. Calvin Ayre has been in the U.S. federal system as well. So I don't know. Maybe they have some sort of a hold over those two guys.
Yeah. I think what's a lot more likely is they realize they could like latch onto a critical security parameter like the block size and just create a bunch of fuckery and confusion and like I could see the goal being that they obviously wanted the hard fork, they wanted all this stuff. Like it's like one thing that struck me in reading about all this stuff, like not just block size wars but outside of it, is like how I don't know, it's like the concentration of spooks within big blockers seems to be higher than like pretty much any other faction that we've seen in Bitcoin. And it's like they're either incompetent or they understand that, raising the block size is an absolutely critical security parameter, and that's something that they want to create some fuckery around.
Yeah.
And while I don't controversy specifically as a spook, I do subscribe to that general theory as to what Bitcoin Cash was. And I think, people might say, oh, well, the government already tried that, so they're not going to do it again. Bullshit. The government had been trying to invade fucking Iraq or fucking Afghanistan for what, like fucking 30 years? Like, the first time they did it and they got away with it for a little while and they had to pull back and, they waited until they had another opportunity and fucking did it again. The government, isn't necessarily going to change their tactics. In fact, it's completely conceivable that the government will just repeat the exact same tactics that they've always done indefinitely because most people don't even know about it. Most people don't know shit about the tactics of the federal government. Most people think that they're a bunch of fucking, flag pin guy with, Boy Scouts. You know what I mean? Like they're like a lot of people actually think that these people are trying to keep us safe and shit. Like no, they have well established tactics that they've been using for I don't know, fucking 80 years or some stupid shit at this point. They're pretty refined with their tactics, and I don't see any reason to believe that they're going to switch it up. So I think that they're going to try a BCAS style attack again at some point, and it'll probably be on because they'll have had a lot of time to think about it. But I think that type of attack, because Patrick, your comment was, the government already tried that and it failed, and it's like, yeah, well, knowing the U.S. government, they're going to try again. Dude.
Yeah, and keep in mind, I didn't say that they wouldn't do that. What I said was they kind of already did that and it failed. So I guess my argument is that it's going to fail again, and it'll fail spectacularly, just like Bitcoin Cash did. That was my point. I wasn't necessarily saying they wouldn't do that. I was just saying that it's not going to work. You can't incentivize the miners. You can incentivize a few miners. You can't incentivize 80% of the miners to come over.
Well, as I'm sure you know, a huge percentage of Bitcoin miners are now in North America, and specifically in the United States. I think more and more of them are going to immigrate to the United States. And I think as we see this, at a certain point, if over 51% of the hash rate is in the United States, which is pretty conceivable the way that things are going, I think it's entirely possible that you just see a situation where the government goes to all the miners. If they're like, look, you have two options. You can have your mine seized and you can go to prison, or you can do what we tell you and you can mine some Fed coin. I think if you think that all these big mining companies are just radicalized Bitcoiners who are going to be like, no, we're going to keep mining the authentic main chain and shit. No, they're not. Half of them are fucking WEF spooks. They'll believe in ESG and shit. They'll do whatever the fuck the government tells them to. I don't buy this the incentives will fucking fix it thing. I do think long term the incentives will still win, but in the short term, they can do a tremendous amount of damage.
Yeah, I agree.
All their machines are in buildings you can find on Google and surround with a SWAT team in about 35 minutes.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think they're going to launch necessarily Fed coin, a SHA-256. I think that's pretty out there. But as far as the next Bitcoin civil war, this is what Pledit is saying in the chat, and I agree with it. Is it's going to be around the ESG issue, Riot. I don't know about as much Riot's involvement, but Marathon, I know 100% has been trying to censor transactions. They came up with this idea of clean block. I think there's gonna be a major push for that, and I think that the large mining companies are a major. They're one of the biggest in specifically in North America, are one of the biggest obstacles that we're gonna have to overcome. And I think what's amazing is that I don't think that the mining operations that are this large and centralized are going to be sustainable ultimately.
And keep in mind, Marathon's Clean Blocks initiative went down in flames almost immediately.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're even doing that anymore. Just because, and it's not because they're good people and they got harassed on Twitter and they stopped doing it. They just realized we can't. There's no possible way that we can do this. It's not, anybody can pass any law they want, but we physically cannot mine a clean block. That doesn't make any sense in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I think what they were missing is there was not the hash rate in North America, and it was not coordinated well enough. And like what we're going to be seeing happening in the next 6 months is the ESG narrative is going to be, it's going to be insane the way that they push it and the way that they push climate change. It's just going to pick up and become just as hysterical as COVID has been over the last, couple of years. And I think the company, like I was at this mining conference a couple months ago, last 2 weeks ago, not that long ago. And that was a major topic of discussion at the conference from the speakers, was like how you have to go along with the ESG narrative and you have to go with these renewables and you have to go, it's the only way to gain funding. And I think that's, kind of an intentional push. And it's these massive companies like Rhodium and Marathon that are pushing this. And I think it's going to be a coordinated effort. It's going to be across multiple sectors. And that's what's different than what Marathon tried to do in the past. I mean, it's so incredibly stupid and backwards, and I think it will fail, but I think that's going to be, a major contention point. And there's going to be a lot of Bitcoin companies that are caught up in it. And I don't know how much of a choice that they're like, kind of like Jesse Powell and Kraken, like his tweet where he said, I have to comply with the KYC AML, like freezing accounts, all that bullshit. I think it's going to be the same exact thing for large scale Bitcoin miners, but yeah, we'll see.
I mean, I don't really know. I wasn't at that conference, so I don't know. And I'm not really a professional miner, so maybe I'm kind of talking out of turn, but it seems to me like the mining companies can actually use the ESG narrative to push more Bitcoin mining. We may all four of us on stage right now. We all know that green energy is bullshit. It's actually, arguably, it is worse for the environment to build all this green energy stuff. But if you want green energy, the best way to do it is to have a whole bunch of Bitcoin miners attached to it, so that you can so that when there's excess energy, the Bitcoin miners can use it at a cheap negotiated rate. So, in a sense, the Bitcoin mining institutions can use the ESG narrative to mine more Bitcoin. So again, it's the useful idiots. You're using the useful idiots in the ESG movement to promote Bitcoin. It's not that the useful idiots are coming into Bitcoin and screwing it up. I guess maybe I'm just too much of an optimist. I've talked with Tucson about this before. Sometimes I'm afraid to say that I'm an optimist because a lot of people on Twitter are 100% pessimistic all the time. They think things are always getting worse. And I'm always trying to say, actually, it seems like it's getting worse, but it's actually getting better.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that things are absolutely getting better. They've gotten better for me personally. I think it's kind of whether things are getting better or worse is kind of up to you as an individual and the actions that you take in your life right now, because you can live pretty free despite this, dystopian nightmare around us. But I don't think the ESG narrative is something that you can leverage. This is kind of where I think we disagree. And kind of going back to what Ephesians was talking about earlier with leftists, like these people are psychopaths and they're not logical. And I don't think the answer is to go, try and explain to Elizabeth Warren why Bitcoin mining isn't bad and try and, go out and lobby politicians. Like these are evil psychopaths that have no issue with creating a bunch of human suffering, and they're eventually going to line you up against the wall and shoot you given the chance. Like there's no negotiating with these terrorists, just like we're watching in Canada right now with Trudeau. I mean, that guy is a maniac, and like we're in a civil war right now, and I think it's between these, depopulationists that like green energy. It's not just that it's bad for the environment, but this whole movement is very anti-human. Like a really, really good book I'm reading right now is The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels by Alex Epstein, and he outlines this. And like people don't really consider what it means to use less electricity and just to completely destabilize the power grid. Like they're, be able to pull off in like California and what they're doing in Germany right now and how destructive that is. So yeah, I mean, I think it's gonna hit a breaking point at some point. And I think these big mining companies in North America are going to go down. And like they think that they can leverage this system, this ESG nonsense, but I think they're going to be the suckers in this end. And then there's the question of what happens with all those machines at that point that are, sitting there when they get shut down or co-opted.
I saw some signs in San Diego this weekend that said stop funding unreliable solar. So it's interesting to see some people start to wake up to that, what you talked about.
Yeah, renewable energy.
It's a trap!
That's my new sound that I'm really proud of.
No, I got it. It's a trap. Yeah, absolutely. And let me explain why renewable energy is bad for the environment. Because everyone talks about pollution, and I'm not saying pollution isn't a problem. 100% pollution is a problem, and the best way to deal with pollution is really capitalism. Because if you look at the places that are less capitalist, there's worse pollution, there's more disease. But here's the point. Here's the thing that most people don't realize: is pollution is the number 2 threat to the environment. Most people ignore the number 1 threat to the environment. Now, pollution is bad. Again, I'm not saying it's good. Pollution is bad, but the environment has a way of handling it. There's a way for eventually the earth kind of, recycles everything. It may take a million years, but eventually things get recycled. What's worse than pollution for the environment, the number 1 danger to the environment is actually habitat destruction. Because if a habitat gets destroyed, it's not coming back. It's done. It's done forever. The animals, the plant life, everything that was living there, dead, and they're not coming back. And the amount of habitat that has to be destroyed, I'm not an environmentalist, but that is really bad. I know that if you go into the desert and you clear out, thousands of acres to build a huge solar farm, I understand how much wildlife had to be destroyed for that to happen. And for what? And for what? Did it really improve the environment? You released a little bit less carbon, which you actually didn't. You actually probably released more carbon in the environment. So you didn't even help the pollution aspect of it. And you destroyed a huge habitat. And that's why green energy is bad for the environment. It's the habitat destruction. If you can build a power plant that has a small footprint that can produce power, many times more power than what a wind farm or what a solar farm produces, that's actually better for the environment. And especially if it's nuclear. I know some people don't like nuclear, but nuclear energy nowadays is actually, the technology is here to make it much more efficient and much more safer than how they built them in the 1960s and 70s.
Yeah, and I think people are realizing that, especially like when they're living in places that are being terrorized by these energy policies. Like, it's just amazing to me to talk to people that live in, San Diego, for example, and they're paying 36 cents a kilowatt hour. Like, it's just unbelievable. So it's pretty obvious, but, these people that are pushing these policies are not doing it from a logical standpoint. Like, they've been wrong over and over again about their predictions for decades, and they don't care. They ultimately don't care. And I think the average person has trouble wrapping their minds around their goals because they're just so psychopathic. It's kind of unbelievable to think of, like, the normal average day person isn't like, how do we reduce the population by 4 billion people in the next 20 years? But these people, that's like their goal of like what gets them excited and wakes them up in the morning. So it's really sinister and dark. Vivek, you got any thoughts on the ESG nightmare that's brewing?
This weekend he was telling me he loves it all. Loves ESG.
Vivek loves
Yeah,
it.
I think ESG is really good. We need to be careful about all the oil in the world. Like, dinosaur lives matter. We should never forget them.
Dinosaurs actually don't exist, so I'm not sure where you're getting your information. But
Are you saying I don't exist? They were my ancestors. Just look at this picture.
no, they weren't dinosaurs. There were large lizards at one point, but there were no dinosaurs.
Yeah, no. Yeah, for the ESG stuff, I don't know. It's not even worth engaging anymore. It's exhausting trying to debate people on what is a good use or a bad use of energy, and like I know it's just like it's crabs in a bucket. It's not even worth our time anymore.
And what Patrick was saying, like I just want to push back a little bit about one thing he said, Patrick. You said something about it doesn't even reduce the amount of carbon, and therefore it's not even a net positive for pollution. I feel like those types of arguments, you're just seeding the ground. Which again, my whole thesis is you should just reject all of that entirely. Don't play into their propaganda narratives, because they've constructed a lot of propaganda narratives that people just kind of by default play into, and that's how they win. And a big part of the way that we win is by not engaging in their propaganda narratives.
Yeah, true. And carbon isn't really. I mean, carbon monoxide. Yeah, but carbon dioxide isn't really even a pollutant.
Not only is it not even really a pollutant, I mean, it's a net positive. We should be welcoming more and more carbon dioxide, because one of three things is going to happen: the Earth is going to get warmer, the Earth is going to get colder, or the Earth is going to stay the exact same temperature. Now, the middle one is just not an option. It's just not something that we can engineer in any capacity. Now, we do have some control to some extent, not to a large extent, but to some extent, we do have some capacity to control whether it gets colder or hotter. And between the two options, hotter is obviously the better one, by a lot. If the Earth gets colder, it's going to be absolutely fucking horrible. So, if we only have two options, hot or cold, I pick hot.
Yeah, I pick hot too, because that means that you'd be able to grow a lot more food in different regions.
Exactly. It'd be positive. There would be so much more food. There would be so much more flourishing. It would be a wonderful experience. And yeah, people who live in fucking Miami might get wrecked. Sorry, this is the way things go. We can't fucking play God here. I mean, I know some people try, but it doesn't actually work.
I could smoke a cigar outdoors in February in New Hampshire. So yeah, absolutely. It was 55 degrees today and sunny. I was so happy.
Yeah, man. Global warming is
In the desert, hotter weather triggers me.
Yeah, you gotta get out of the desert ski. You gotta move where it's there's 4 seasons. You gotta move to Canada or New Hampshire.
I don't know. I love the desert.
Yeah, the desert's pretty tight. Plus, you can go to the high desert where it's it gets cold. You need that.
Arizona is an extremely diverse climate. We've got everything out here, and it's cool. Same with Tucson. I mean, you can drive all over the place. A couple hours away from here and see a bunch of different stuff. We have a mountain that gets snow that has a ski run that's super shitty, but it's a whole different ecosystem up there. It's pretty amazing.
And the free state of San Diego is a short drive away.
I don't know. I'm not convinced that San Diego is free until they reinstate full magazines sizes, normal magazine sizes, and lower their energy costs a little bit so you can actually home mine.
No, San Diego is not free, but it's a short drive to Mexico where you get free.
San Diego is free if you happen to buy your magazine during this week of April 2019 for specific handguns that happen to be on the roster, or an AR-15 that you should have registered and is fixed mag. But there's ways around this stuff. But it's as free as you're willing to push it.
Yeah. Or you can be a free individual and just print your own magazines.
I mean, you can do whatever you want, just don't let the range officer see.
Yeah. The filth. From now on, we're calling the police on this episode. We just refer to them as the filth. That's the proper term.
What's a range officer, though? They don't have those where Tucson and I go shoot.
They don't have those in California either, if you know the right spots. Yeah, everyone, if you're smart enough, you pretty much drive to like Vegas or Arizona, and then there's usually some BLM land, and it's free game. Like, no one really cares what you do there. They'll make sure, like, you're not riding dirt bikes on the road, but that's about it.
Don't tell Clancy about that. She says that federal land means that your state is communist or something.
I mean, it has its perks, but yeah.
That's been her latest anti-Arizona rant.
It's a pretty weak.
Well, I mean, like, imagine somewhere like Texas where there's no, like, public land that you could shoot. So it's like you get charged for going to ranges. Not that it's, like, expensive. All in all, it's the same because, like, California, you're spending more on ammo instead of the range. So, yeah, I don't know. It's fucked wherever you go.
I hear gunshots at night sometimes where I live. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, though. I live in a kind of a sketchy part of New Hampshire.
I hear them. I used to live in central Tucson. I'd hear them every night, and it was a bad thing. And then I moved out to the boonies of Tucson and hear them pretty regularly, and it's a good thing. So, yeah, the context matters.
I do think it's a lot of people just kind of shooting out in the wilderness, but you never know.
It's a beautiful sound to fall asleep to, as long as it's not people shooting at each other. Yeah, I didn't even register, Vivek, when you said range officer. That didn't even register in my head because I never go to the range.
Yeah, most people are like, wait, you guys shoot indoors next to people? Aren't you scared as hell? There's always like some retard that's gonna like fucking flag someone trying to like load up a magazine or something because it's their first time shooting and they want to take like selfies and stuff. It's pitiful.
Yeah, that's a thing. I think that's...
Yeah,
oh, go ahead.
I just say I seen shit like that on YouTube, and people goofing around on ranges.
It's happened to me. Like, I was at the range and there's this person like not flagging me, but like holding the gun up, and then it was like a 2-story range, and then they're kind of really loose moving around, and I guess I could see that like it was cocked back, but then there was a magazine, and I did see a bullet. So I'm like, fuck, if this person just pushed that slide forward and accidentally like fucking, his finger was on the trigger too, so I was like, oh, this is fucking cringe. And then my other buddy is like a Marine, so he's like, yo, fucking point the gun down range. And he told like multiple times, so after a while we just like talked to people like in charge of that shit, and they kicked him out.
This is why we need a 3D printer in everybody's home to get everybody guns, because the prohibition of guns or at least the restriction of them, I think creates a much more unsafe environment around them, because people just don't learn those basic skills of not to have your finger on the trigger, not to point it at people, always check like 20 times that it's unloaded, all that basic stuff that you get taught when you're around people that are responsible with guns. But creating this whole fear culture around it is really, really destructive. So that's why one of my favorite things to do is when I have people coming from communist jurisdictions, I take them out shooting, and I give them, a pretty extensive safety talk before I let them touch the gun. Take it pretty seriously.
Yeah, surprisingly, the unloaded gun is way more dangerous than the loaded gun. whenever you get like these accidents, it's always with an unloaded gun or what they thought was an unloaded gun.
Yeah.
People tend to give loaded guns a little bit more respect, but unloaded guns, like the Alec Baldwin situation.
Well, Alec Baldwin intentionally shot that person, I'm pretty sure. But
yeah, he loaded that gun himself.
Yeah, but he was like, it's not loaded, so it's fine. He even said in an interview, he may be lying, but I think he was telling the truth, that he thought she fainted. He didn't think he shot her.
No, I think he put the bullet in so he could murder her. But
why? She didn't get the apple juice.
I haven't gotten that far yet, but I read a good article about it.
Yeah, I've seen some stuff on it too. I think he intentionally.
I have no idea what happened.
Alec Baldwin.
No, he said that when she collapsed, this is what he said in an interview, that he thought she had fainted. He didn't even know there was a bullet in the gun. Now, a lot of people, called bullshit on that. It's like, how could you not know you just fired a bullet? But I actually believe him. I actually think that he pulled the trigger and he didn't even know he had shot her. I think he thought that she had fainted.
Yeah, maybe. But there is some truth to that, and that's why, and that's like one of those important lessons that people miss, is that every firearm, you treat it as it's loaded, even after you check it. That's why you don't point it at people. And I guess it's, a little bit different on a movie set when you're using prop guns, but you should still treat the firearm as if it's a firearm.
Yeah, I heard in older movies, like you see like a silent movie from like the 1910s or something, or 1920s, and you see people shooting. Those are real bullets. They weren't using blanks. So, yeah.
Could you imagine you're shooting a movie and then like you're actually shooting a Tommy gun? That'd be fucking sick.
Destroy some sets pretty quick.
Someone posted this on Twitter. I think it was on Twitter. I saw a video of a duel from like the turn of the century, from like the year 1900. Someone had filmed this duel where one guy shot another guy. They kind of lined up and they both pointed their pistols at each other, and one guy shot the other guy. And some people were saying like, "Oh, this is fake." And I was looking at the footage, and I'm 99% sure the footage was real, because like to fake this footage would have been really difficult to fake. Like it's far more likely that this was a real duel and someone actually shot somebody else. In 1902 or whenever this was filmed. It was pretty incredible. And because I know like back then they didn't really, use blanks. That wasn't really a thing. So I'm pretty sure it was real. It wasn't like a fake duel or something.
The CGI back in the day was pretty funny. Like they were clever. Like like in kung fu movies or like action movies, to make it look like people have superpowers and can like jump onto houses and stuff. They basically videotaped them like jumping off of a house and just played the footage backwards.
Yeah.
The only other possibility was that the footage is newer and they tried to make it look older, but that would have been difficult to make too. Very difficult to make newer footage look like it's from 1902. So even though I'm not really a film expert, I was pretty sure that duel was real.
We should bring back duels.
I don't know. I mean, a part of me says no because I'm against senseless violence. But the positive thing about duels was that you wouldn't go out there and badmouth people behind their backs, because you knew that if it got back to them, they would challenge you to a duel. So that was kind of a positive effect of a duel, is that people were just more polite. This is why, especially in British culture, when they insult you, they do it in a way that it sounds like they're giving you a compliment, but they're actually insulting you. So they had to like veil their insults in a way, because if they came out and they were they insulted you flagrantly, then they would be challenged to a duel, and nobody wanted to do that. So part of me says yes, part of me says no. Maybe Craig Wright, if he couldn't just go out there and sue everybody, if he had to actually challenge everybody to a duel, maybe he would be less likely to get upset when someone said he wasn't Satoshi. I don't think he would have the balls to go around challenging people's duels. He's much more of a coward, and he just wants to sue people that say that he's not Satoshi.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about duels, though, is it's consensual by both parties, and that's what's different. And that's why I think it's appropriate. But yeah, I mean, on that topic, I think it's about time that we repurpose Guantanamo Bay. I think there's a lot of people we could put there.
As a gladiator stadium for duels?
No, I think we just need to send all the politicians to Guantanamo.
Well, Tucson, if Craig Wright challenged you to a duel, what would you do?
I'd probably take it.
And would you like shoot into the ground, or would you actually go for the kill?
I'd go for the kill.
Hell yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's like, it's not that I have necessarily like any hatred towards it, but isn't that kind of the point? I mean, if he challenged me to the duel, then he would have the intention of trying to, kill me. So why wouldn't you actually shoot? Like, shooting at the ground is kind of silly.
Yeah, no, we're kind of off topic here, but definitely he's such a bad actor that it would be worth it to take him out, even if you have to face legal repercussions. Not advocating. Don't. No, if anyone's listening to me, don't go out there and do something stupid. That's not what I'm advocating. I was talking about a hypothetical if he challenged you to a duel. So I don't want anyone to misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not advocating someone to go out and do something to Craig Wright. Please don't.
I'm going to quote you, Patrick. Patrick said, go challenge Craig to a duel. I'm going to write a Bitcoin magazine article about it. Keep on getting these randos with like 2 followers.
At the height of the animosity during the 2017 Bitcoin fork wars, there was some discussion around, nobody that I knew was talking about it, but apparently on some Reddit threads or something, people were talking about kicking out Roger Ver because people were so upset with Roger Ver. And then someone mentioned it to him, like in an interview, and I came out against it. I'm like, nobody do anything to Roger Ver, and obviously, most people who are on the small blocker sites did the same thing. But I do like Roger Ver's answer when someone asked him about the death threats he was getting. Even though I don't like Roger Ver, I think this was a good answer. He said, well, if anybody, tries to come after me, they're probably the ones that are going to end up losing their life, which I thought was a pretty badass answer, even though overall I disagree with him.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. I think that's the attitude that, we have to have. And, some people might find like conversations like this tasteless or, edgy or whatever. But, the reality is, like, we need to get rid of the police. And that's incredibly important to live in a free society, because they're the ones instituting all of these insane policies. Like, we wouldn't have had not all the nonsense of the last 2 years. Like, people wouldn't have complied if there wasn't a gun to their head and people showing up at their businesses, shutting it down with force, or arresting parents, going to schools, stuff like that. All the tyranny ends when the police are gone, and when the police are gone, it's already your responsibility to protect yourself. And I think that's why it's so important to live in a jurisdiction, like Skeeve talks about this a lot. It's so important to live in a jurisdiction where you have the ability to protect yourself without the state going after you for doing so. Because ultimately, like, the police, that's not their job. Their job is to enforce the edicts of the state. And so I think this is a much more sane conversation.
Well, I mean, when you say something like that, Tucson, a lot of people, kind of jump to this weird, post-apocalyptic conclusion. What I like to stress, which is most people don't even think about, is most of the time you're not actually using the police for your security. You lock your own doors. You kind of take responsibility for your own security. You don't think to yourself, it's okay for me to walk at 2 a.m. in this neighborhood because, there's police, so I'll be fine. You kind of already think to yourself that you're responsible for your own security. You don't go to you don't go to a sketchy bar that has no security. You go to a place that, where you feel safe. You go to a casino where you see that there's security guards everywhere. So you kind of already aren't really relying on police for your protection. Most people, if they think about it for longer than a few seconds, it's like not that much will change if there's no police. Yeah, maybe you won't get a speed trap on the highway, but for the most part, most of your protection, your security is not being covered by police already.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. And, for the people that go to the post-apocalyptic mindset, a lot of people in our country, in the United States right now, are already living in a post-apocalyptic place. I mean, it's pretty insane, the amount of violence that's coming up. And I think like that argument, and the argument I always take on that is the idea that there's increased violence because of lack of police is just so silly and unconnected. Like, the reason for the increased violence is because of the economic circumstances that are happening right now. Because if people have stability, there's not really, unless you're a psychopath, there's not a ton of incentive to go out there and commit acts of violence against other people. And that's not the case right now. People are being completely decimated.
Also, if you don't have to be at work in the morning at 7 a.m. or whatever, so a lot of people were out of work, so they're more likely to be out there committing crimes rather than worrying about getting to bed on time so they can get to work on time, things like that.
Yeah. It's probably violent video games. That's the core issue in our society right now. We need to get rid of the violent video games.
Yeah, there was a lot of freak out about violent video games in the 90s. There were some really bad studies that came out that showed that violent video games caused people to go out and commit violence. It was all junk science, but a lot of people ran with it, and their reasoning was, you can watch a violent movie or you can read a really, really violent, novel, but when you're playing a video game, somehow it's different because you're the one who's actually doing it, And it's like, just like the same thing they tried to say during the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse. They were trying to tie him playing video games to him defending his life, and it was just so silly. I mean, if it was me on the stand, I would have said something like, "Well, I play chess too. That doesn't really mean that I'm, that I want to go with fighting a war where I'm taking out the queen and I'm, doing this. It's just a game. It's just a board game. Same thing with video games."
Patrick, you just reminded me of those old Goosebump books or whatever, where it says, if you choose to do this, turn to this page. If you don't do this, turn to the other page.
Yeah, choose your own adventure.
Yeah,
yeah, I had those books. I was a big fan of those books. Most of them weren't very good, but there was a couple of them that were actually really well done. Most of those books were junk, but a couple of them were really interesting, exciting tales and adventures.
Well, those are creating violent individuals in our society. We need to ban them.
There was one book where you actually needed a sheet of paper, and it was an actual role-playing game, and you needed dice with you to. And I tried to play through this book. I think I was in 5th or 6th grade, and there was this one part of the book which was impossible to get through. There was this giant beast which had so much life, and it was impossible to do any damage to him. And I'm I would always skip over that part. I would skip to the next page. I'll be yeah, I defeated that thing. I would never actually play it out. And then later on, I tried to figure out, when I was an adult, I tried to figure out, how are you supposed to get past the thing? And they said, when they designed the book, they didn't really do a good job. It was a poorly designed game in the first place. So I guess, I wasn't the only one who was cheating on that part of the book.
We got a disagreement with your argument, Patrick, on YouTube. Pledit says Patrick's view only holds true in G7 countries. 1/5 of the world lives in China. The surveillance state and social credit system to make their citizens slaves to the state. It's really a dystopia. I mean, the one thing. Oh, go ahead.
No, sorry, I didn't catch it. To make their citizens do what?
Make them slaves to the state.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really easy to point fingers at China and say that's a dystopian nightmare. And this is one of the problems that I think most humans have, is they're unable to see, the circumstances that they're living in. And we live in a pretty crazy cult in the United States where there's just this worship of, military action abroad and enslaving other cultures, and just a total indifference towards it. Like I just remember like people jumping up and cheering in the streets when they killed or supposedly killed Osama bin Laden, and like how everybody was so, ecstatic about that, and the excitement that goes with going and create, and not that I would say that Osama bin Laden was a good guy or anything like that. I think he had ties to the CIA, so I think the story is a little bit more convoluted than is presented. But just the sickness of our society. I mean, we live in many ways a dystopian nightmare. Like we're watching what's happening in Canada. That can happen in the United States. We have a tremendous amount of surveillance. The CIA is spying on all of us. The NSA is spying on all of us. There are very clear-cut incentives to go after anybody that is breaking away from the narrative and disobeying the rulers. Like that's the ultimate crime that you can commit in any society, is being a hindrance to the ruling class. And in China, it's accelerated a little bit, but these policies are enacted and they're attempting to enact here too. So,
yeah. Well, did anybody hear the recent interview on Joe Rogan with this guy, Majid? I don't remember his last name, but it's a 3-hour interview, but the entire last hour of the interview is talking about all the stuff that Tucson was just talking about. Like the virus that we got, it wasn't COVID. It was the China virus that we got wasn't COVID. The China virus that we got was a surveillance state, lockdowns, past, digital IDs and eventually microchipping or something like that. That's the virus. And the CBDCs. You even talk about CBDCs, where if you're social, if you spend too much money this week on buying steak, you can't buy any more steak. You got to go buy something healthy like like a celery or something like that. And like that's the real threat. It's not the virus. And it's not really a military issue either. It's if anything, if we go to war, I'm hoping there's no war in Ukraine. But if we go to war in Ukraine, like that's going to be helping the Chinese the most. It's almost going to be like toppling Saddam would help Iran. You're going to weaken Russia. You're going to weaken America. You're going to get bogged down in a war that we can't win, and both sides are going to lose. Both Russia and America are going to lose, and guess who's going to be the victor? It's going to be China.
Yeah, shout out to Scott Horton. He did a really good episode this week on the Ukraine issue, and I've talked about it a few times. Like essentially what's happening is there's this poor country that's just been unable to get their feet under them, I'm trying to get away from using country. There's a bunch of people living in, these fake drawn out borders that have been unable to get their feet under them because they're in the middle of a political chess game between, a group of psychopaths. And it's just insane.
Yeah, apparently Stalin was going through Ukraine's border and he kind of messed up. He put a whole bunch of area that was kind of Russian into Ukraine, and no one's exactly sure why he did it. He may have done it for strategic reasons to try to make Ukraine more Russian, or he may have just screwed up. But whatever it is, that's kind of the root of what's causing all this problem. Because Ukraine has a part which is Russian, and it also has a Ukrainian part, and the two, halves of the country are kind of always at each other's throats.
Yeah, I used to live in Kiev as a kid, and a lot of people there spoke both Russian and Ukrainian. And the further east you went, the more Ukrainian there was, and the further east there was more Russian. The further west there was more Ukrainian. So there was definitely a major cultural divide there is a cultural divide in that country.
Yeah, so problems are caused by statism.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the same issue that created the Bosnian War. These imperial countries will go in and draw lines and fuck everything up instead of just letting things kind of form organically. And it's just a true testament to the failures of central planning. And this is just something we have to consider, is like the state is the ultimate, just the amount of human suffering that results from it. I don't think it's an institution that can be allowed to exist. And it's very, very apparent without it that there's a lot less human suffering.
All this human suffering has been known for quite some time. It's been part of the plan for a long time. It will continue to be the plan and part of it for a long time until, I don't know, we get, let's say about 70% of the rest of the ass hats in the world on fucking board with what's going on.
Why do you think it needs to be such a large number?
Because people are, as like a whole group, they're blind, and that's why it needs to be such a large number. The bread and fucking circus regime is in full effect, and they haven't even rolled out UBI yet. I mean, it's going to take a large percentage, my friend.
Well, I think it's a very small percentage, and I mean, 70% of the population doesn't have a critical mind, and they're not very, tuned into this stuff or really have a care in the world about what's going on. They just go on with whatever, they're told to do and kind of follow their marching orders. And when you look at the people that are setting these plans into motion and are controlling governments and controlling, all of these mega corporations that are creating a lot of these narratives around ESG and whatever, they're a very, very small minority, but they have control of the assets. And I think
that's why I believe it'll take 70%, because you're pretty much laying it out for me.
But yeah, I mean, you shift the 70% with the small intolerant minority ultimately. Like what's happening in Canada right now from an optics standpoint is pretty powerful, and it's shifting a lot of people's opinion. And if you look at the people that have fought against the COVID regime, it's been a very small minority of people, and yet it's a very powerful voice that is influencing a large portion.
Still not enough yet. They haven't. They just doubled down on the stupid over there. So obviously, a minority is not taking the cake.
I think what I would say is, like, as it gets harder and harder for them to steal your income or steal your wealth, because more and more of that's denominated in Bitcoin. I mean, think about your wealth or your income from the mining versus your income from a W-2 job. I mean, it's just like, as more and more of us get sovereign, the ability for the masses to steal from us through the state gets less and less. And so, like, I personally, like, that 70%, like, I'd probably even go as high as 80-85%, that I just couldn't possibly care less what they think or don't think about anything, or what they're doing or not doing. As much as I can, I try to ignore them, and just focus on how I can protect myself from them stealing things through the state, and through other means.
Oh, that's what we're not already there. Like, everybody here in this group isn't already there yet. I should hope they are, because I mean, if you're not, the curve, it's getting ahead of you. Just saying.
80% of the people will go along with whatever's in charge, whether it's socialism, Nazism, democracy, anarchy, whatever the system is. 80% of people will just go along with it. In fact, there's experiments where they've, nobody on this stage, I don't think, will do this, but There are experiments where you go into a room and they say we're doing an eye test, see how long this line is, and everyone will agree with the rest of the group, even though the line is off.
Groupthink, yes, the groupthink experiment. Oh my fucking god! I was just about to bring that up, and you hit the nail right on the head. Hey, you tell a fucking group of 10 people to convince one guy that this pen is blue, he's gonna walk into the room, the pen will be black. The fucking whole group of people, the guy will actually knowing the pen is fucking black, he will agree that the shit is blue just to go along with the rest of the fucking group. There's a lot of studies out there on this shit. It's really disgusting, but it's fucking scary as shit too, if you think about it.
It's not necessarily scary because I say if everyone's going to just go along with whatever, then fine. Then we'll give them liberty, and everyone will be fine with it. Everyone will go along with it. So yeah, I think there's this idea out here that people will not be able to live under liberty. Like they'll rebel, or they'll do something bad, or they'll start burning down cities. And it's like, I don't think that's what's going to happen. Sure, there's always going to be troublemakers in any group, but most of the people will just go along with it. So I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Maybe that goes back to the argument that tonight we're having.
We're not totally there yet, though, Patrick. We're not totally there yet. We're still at the point where we haven't totally implemented freedom fucking currency on a global level as a whole, and so we haven't seen what kind of ridiculous shit the fiat fuckery will produce, and what kind of shit they'll try and convince the masses to go with and get that groupthink and all that. What we were just talking about, we haven't seen how far they'll take that shit yet.
Yeah, it's gonna be the next couple of years are gonna be pretty interesting. But I mean, we're watching.
I mean, if you're a proponent and an advocate of self custody and mining Bitcoin to where you're getting your sats direct from the Coinbase and you're not participating in any kind of fucking bullshit structure system that the masses that we are trying to separate ourselves from is involved with. If you're into all that, be prepared to be labeled an enemy of the state, potentially somebody who is not friendly to anybody in society, because that's what it's coming down to. I mean, look at what's going on in Canada. If you were associated with the funds, now you're a domestic terrorist. That's coming. I mean, the people that think that it's not have gravely mistaken themselves. The institutions that are out there, the IMF, the Federal Reserve, the fucking ECU, all these fucking assholes who think that we should all have nothing and be happy, that they're going to make us out to be fucking terrorists, man.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important in the short term to have the attitude and the importance of proliferating this technology, and being out there actively trying to get your coworkers to self-custody Bitcoin, setting them up with a phone wallet, doing stuff like that. That's
the other thing, aside from those the particular fundamentals that we should all be pushing to the people around us about Bitcoin, is to let them know that Bitcoin is fuck you money, and that when it comes down to it, after you've purchased your Bitcoin and you remove that shit from the exchange, that if anybody demands it from you at any point in time, that you tell them, fuck you. Period. They're not getting it, and that they can't. And you have to make sure that they understand that, because eventually, when it comes down to it, you don't think they'll go the route of 6102 on this. You're crazy. I mean, people that think that won't happen again, they have no idea. And so when that happens, though, people are going to be like, the exchange knows that I sent Bitcoin to cold storage. Well, yeah, fuck them. The fucking assholes who had gold way back in the day. The fucking 6102 rule came out where they bought their gold from. If they were fucking KYC'd and all that shit, but there were people that chose not to fucking turn it over. Those people fared well into the future. The ones who did, fucked, wrecked entirely. Do not be those fucking cucks. Protect yourself. Understand what you have. You gotta understand what you have. I mean, you wouldn't fucking it's like owning a gun. You understand what you have. I had a conversation with a guy earlier today, right? We were talking in DMs about Bitcoin. And he's like, look, I have Cold Card. I haven't used it yet. I was thinking about pulling my Bitcoin off the exchange and putting it on there. I was like, dude, get on it. Would you wait to learn to use a fucking gun? And he's like, no. And I said, well, this is bigger than that, my friend. So if you standing around holding, that's just what you're doing. You got to get ready to pull the fucking trigger, dude, or else when it comes down to it, your ass is grass.
Yeah, if you think the state's going to be nice to Bitcoiners, look at what the U.S. government did to Libya and Iraq when they went off the dollar standard and sold oil. And maybe that's one of the saving graces for El Salvador is that they don't have oil right now. But definitely, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out down there. And I sure as hell hope they don't go and just completely demolish it and steamroll it.
Well, it's very interesting that people always refer to like the state or how the state will do this or how the state will do that. And it's interesting because they are the ones who enact the violence to, enforce the monetary policies, sanctions, and everything else. But interestingly enough, the fucking state, they also are beholden to the money themselves because quite literally, the fucking European Central Bank, the fucking Federal Reserve, and all that shit, they are not the fucking state. They're private entities. So it's just, they're just doing the fucking bidding of these asshats, pretty much.
It's called fascism.
Well, them and the lobbyists, and like you got Raytheon, Boeing, and all them motherfuckers out there who got a lot of skin in the game when it comes to the fucking IMF, Bank of International Settlements, World Economic Forum. Fucking that whole crew is involved with the fucking gang who is the bank, the ECU, the ECB, the fucking Fed. It's really big, giant orgy that's just convoluted and hard to pick apart. There was a flow chart out there floating around that I saw one time that really broke it down well. But man, to get into that noise is a headache in itself.
Yeah, I think the state is the term that I use because these private corporations are only able to leverage what they're able to as a result of the monopoly on violence that the state has. So there's
what about hand in hand now? Almost, yeah. It would seem like.
Yeah, it's called fascism.
I have a quick question because you said something super interesting, Tarantula, that the people who didn't hand over their gold actually did the best, right? And so, from my understanding of the 6102, like it's not like agents were sent to people's homes who had like a hodled amount of gold. It was just like people willfully turning it over. And I don't know how much money they really spent on the actual, like, hey, let's go confiscate gold from people's homes, right? So I wasn't alive during those times, so that's like kind of like a question as well that I had, like how really was that handled, like on the state by state level? Maybe some states handled it differently than others, So on that end, it's like, yeah, maybe they were KYC'd, but they hodled and they won,
I'll say a lot of people had their bank in gold. Had their gold in the banks itself already, not holding it themselves. They didn't self-custody, so to speak. And so the bank just held on to it.
But the banks don't know what's in your safety deposit box, right? Like, they don't know what's in it technically, right? Because you don't have to disclose that.
No, these were values denominated as gold, like, and holding. So they already knew. And there was what do you call it, a campaign to reach out to individuals who privately held, telling them that there are mandates going into effect, stating, you need to come and do this. And they issued the notes at a horrible discount to the premium for the individuals that market. And then what happened to gold price after that? Well, there's already been a few books written. You can go read them yourself.
Right. Yeah, so if you held your gold at the bank, they took it. But if you held your gold yourself, all they did is they said, well, you have to turn it in. But a significant percentage didn't. And the reason why they didn't go door to door and confiscate it is not because the government, out of the goodness of their heart, didn't want to do that. The reason why they did is because they couldn't. They would have had to spend maybe 10 or 100 times as much money to try to take each, they would have spent 10 million or 100 million for each million they collected. It would have been difficult. It would have been impossible, and they wouldn't have been able to do it. So that's why they just didn't do it. The government tends not to pick fights that it knows it can't win.
That's right. Interestingly enough, imagine now if they tried to do something like that with gold. I mean, they literally have the technology to detect gold fucking via aerial view if they wanted to, in topography scanning and whatnot. So, but I mean, with Bitcoin, you want to talk about a fight that they can't win. Tell me that the paper wallet that shit was sent to exists somewhere on this property that I have acres of, or that anything else that exists beyond that. Very interesting concept, Pat, man. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and the difference is with, obviously this will apply to gold as well, but there's no such thing as a Bitcoin account unless it's with a third party. But if you have the Bitcoins, that's not an account. That's keys. Keys exist that someone controls. Maybe you control those keys, maybe you don't. There's really no way to prove it. Maybe someone else controls the keys. Maybe you and someone else control it as a multi-sig, and those coins can't move unless both of you guys sign. This doesn't exist in the fiat system, and this is something the government doesn't understand. They could possibly pass laws outlawing self-custody. First of all, it wouldn't pass constitutional muster in the U.S., but assuming you're in a jurisdiction where they don't have a First Amendment, they can pass laws against self-custody. It's not going to work. I mean, I'm pretty sure that there's mining in China now, even though it's banned. I'm pretty sure even now there's mining in China.
There is.
I'm bullish on the Chinese miners.
Bro, there's dudes mining in China tunneling via proxy satellite, and they're doing it off-grid fashion through makeshift hydro turbines and waterfalls and shit.
That's so badass.
I seen pictures of dudes like in Telegram channels shared that you can see these dudes walking through the fucking jungle with like hand fucking made wooden backpacks that are just carrying old ass S9s and shit. It is something else. The only thing I can think of is if let's say the U.S. government decided that we couldn't mine Bitcoin in the States anymore, and then I'm already off grid, fucking throwing ASICs on my ATVs and shit when the weather's bad. It's the only thing I can think of that it compared to. But those dudes are over there doing it right now, even under regulation that says you cannot. And so, fucking pour one out to all those dudes.
Yeah, I wonder if we're going to start seeing that happen in... Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I don't know about the U.S. because, it's already been established that code is speech, pretty much, and it's reflected as such constitutionally. So it's hard for them to approach it, aggressively like that. We're just going to shut it down. How are you going to shut down? You're going to shut down the Constitution also? I mean, it's a dicey lane for them to try and drive through if that's the route they want to go.
Well, they could say it's hate speech.
Yeah, it's a hate speech. It's a good one, actually. It's the one amendment that all the Supreme Court justices tend to respect. In fact, they maybe even they respect it to a fault, where there was the Westboro Baptist Church was celebrating or protesting outside of U.S. servicemen that died, their funerals, trying to say the reason why they died is because of homosexuality or something like that, and these guys were sued, and even that the Supreme Court said they have a right to do it. Yes, it's bullshit what they're saying. Yes, it's awful. Yes, they shouldn't be saying that, but there's nothing we can do. The Constitution is protected speech by the Constitution. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't put much weight into constitutional protections, personally.
Hey, there's something real to that too, son. I mean, really, honestly, it is just a piece of paper until they come to your front door, and when you're fucking armed still, everybody looks at it like it's just a piece of paper. Like, as long as you're holding your right to defend yourself in front of that piece of paper, it's not just that. But as soon as you give up that right, like that 2A goes bye-bye, now the fucking powers that be and the asshats that everybody fucking around is elected, they're just going to wipe their ass with that piece of paper. And it ain't going to mean shit.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, ultimately what we see with the Supreme Court, you know, and these decisions is they're ultimately trying to keep the population bought in and have this balance of where people are not completely rejecting their authority altogether. And so in part of doing that, they have to convince the population that whatever they're doing, like, that they have a voice and a say in the society. And, you know, what we're seeing is the media has been so effective at steering public discourse and conversation, and that's breaking down right now. And
they got that illusion of choice out there. Good. But I mean, at a certain point, people start to see through that, and you're right, it starts to break down.
And
I think that, no, go ahead.
And that's when things get interesting and scary. You know, ultimately when they start losing grasp of that and start going after speech. And there hasn't been a very good history of free speech in this country. And, like, a lot of people like to point at the, you know, the First Amendment kind of being.
I think outside of just that particular aspect itself, in regards to a bigger picture of the narratives and whatnot breaking down, for how many years has it been red versus blue, or this or, you know, that narrative going and trying to keep minds captivated? Now it's starting to break down, and I think that it's not just that in the U.S., but I think in countries across the world that, you know, that left, right, whatever, him, her political agenda ideas breaking down, and people are starting to see that it's just, you know, fucking bullshit theater, and that it's not about changing out the actors, it's actually about changing the fucking script. And well, when that actually occurs at a large scale, it threatens more than just the political regime. You know, it starts to threaten the, what do you call it, large corporate regimes, anybody that might be specifically able to be found out, because the distractions that are being had at hand are no longer suitable to command the eyes of the masses. And that's when they all start to the cracks start to form and show. And then I think that that's what we're seeing, that, like, the whole fucking COVID pandemic, scandemic, like, that's a global thing. And, you know, the people are starting to see that, well, that's fleshed itself out. That has came, it's about gone, and what's next? Well, they fucking stirred up another pot full of shit. We got UK, Ukraine, and fucking nobody's talking about what the fuck is going on in Canada. It's just, it seems like only citizens of the world are talking about that, but nobody else. It's just really absolutely crazy if you just sit back and look at the whole entire fucking world as a whole. It's like you can see all the cracks starting to form, and it's like, oh, these little fucking ridiculous fucking distractions start popping up here and there. It's just almost like systematically. It's just insane.
Yes, it's funny to me how you mentioned it is basically deteriorated to, like, either you're with them or you're a white supremacist. No matter what you
see
say.
That shit too, man. Yeah. Hey, I'm waiting for him to start saying that shit in countries like fucking India, where, like, guys like Modi can't keep the fucking COVID narrative going. How them people gonna be racist?
Yeah, but I mean that too versus, like, Taiwan. Like, there's so much more important shit going on, and I don't know, it's crazy. It's just, like, all under the radar.
Hey, to go off of what you guys were just talking about Canada, does it seem to everyone that Trudeau is just not right in the head? Like, I think there's really something wrong with him. Like, there's really a screw loose with him. I mean, the blackface stuff, I mean, that was kind of a warning flag. Like to do that kind of stuff at the age that he did it. This wasn't some prank he did in grade school. This was like something he did as an adult. And like people don't just do that. Like you got to have something wrong in the head to be doing that. There's got to be something wrong with this person. And I think it's when he talks about things like you hold what was the phrase he used? Something like illegal opinions. It wasn't illegal opinions, but he said something stupid like that. Like you have
unacceptable,
unacceptable opinions, something like that. Like come on, who talks like that? He's got to be sick.
He's got syphilis. He's like Hitler.
Yeah, I believe it.
It's eating his brain.
You know, it's actually interesting. Like, I feel like the bar set for the Supreme Court justices is really high, and then you have like the president's office, which is like way lower, right? It's fucking crazy.
What do you mean?
Like to become a Supreme Court justice, I feel like it's still highly respected globally, but to become a U.S. president, not so much. You know what I mean? Like the bar is much lower for our actual like commander of our army, quote unquote. You know,
I could see that actually. I feel like fucking celebrity could become the next U.S. president easily, but definitely not gonna get the fucking SCOTUS position.
Yeah, but it just like it's one of those institutions that I feel like are still like highly revered like across the world. Is like the U.S. Supreme Court.
You know what though? It would appear though as if almost it wouldn't matter because there tends to be what we would call manipulation to stack the bench, so they would say. So it's like, oh, you might have or be highly regarded for this position, but you might only just get it because so and so likes your ideals, and it stands with their own political ideals.
You still go through like this like level of scrutiny, right? Like
yeah, actually, you know what you do to obtain your bar position and everything, but to actually obtain that, you know, once you you're there, you have how many people are running against them? How many get picked? How many are, you know, like what are their views before and after? How many people with differing political views went for the same opportunity and didn't get picked? I don't know, like, look at all those numbers. I think that there might be something there.
Yeah, but what I think Shishi's trying to say is, like, I think what's great about the Supreme Court is their foundation is the Constitution, which is at its core a beautiful document. I know you guys are saying it's just a piece of paper, but it was founded by all of these other fucking libertarian, these individuals, amazing, just awesome people back in the day that got together and said, fuck this shit. And they did a great thing. And for a while, at least it was great.
I think I may have been misunderstood. I don't think it as just a piece of paper. I say that without your ability to protect your own rights, and once you become disarmed, they'll treat you as it's just a piece of paper.
Yeah, I mean.
Oh hell yeah! And sorry to cut you off, section 1 second, but I just have this last thing with the Constitution. Like, yeah, none of the main amendments have been repealed or anything by the Supreme Court. Like any constitutional violations have been done by like politicians and stuff, maybe without repercussions. But yeah, it's kind of interesting how like maybe certain things are being threatened right now, but so far so good, I think, in the history of it.
Yeah, I definitely have a different standpoint of it, where I actually think that the Constitution is actually a tyrannical document. And
sorry, go ahead, finish your thought.
And, you know, the reason why I believe that is, you know, there's this whole idea that, you know, is talked about in government as far as there being a social contract. And I don't really believe that. You know, I don't believe in the Constitution, you know, necessarily because I didn't sign up for it, and neither did, you know, all of the people living in the United States, you know, when the Constitution was founded. Essentially what happened was there was a small group of people that signed a piece of paper and dictated to the rest of the country or this region, you know, what they were going to be living under. And
if anyone disagrees with what Tucson just said, just go on YouTube, type in the Constitution of No Authority. There's like a 2-hour long YouTube video. I think it's still up there. It's really good. That explains all this stuff, and you don't even need to listen to the full 2 hours. If you listen to the first 20 seconds, you basically get the gist of it. But basically, he's right. And the document, the first half of the document is tyrannical. If you look at the articles, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, Article 1 talks about Congress. Article 2 talks about, I'm not sure if it was the executive branch or the judicial branch, and Article 3 talks about the third branch, and then there's Article 4 and 5. All that stuff in there is very tyrannical. The part of the Constitution that is actually good is the second half of the Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is the part of the Constitution where it says this is what the government can't do to you. So the parts where it outlines how the government works is the tyrannical part. But the second half is where it says, no, you can't actually tell people what religion they have to practice. No, you can't actually take people's guns. No, you have to actually give people due process. You can't go and search their homes without a warrant. Things like that. Like that stuff is the good part of the Constitution. The first half is the tyrannical part.
Yeah. Well, it's the checks and balance.
Yeah, but I don't really think it's the checks and balances because I think it's theater. When I look at the Supreme Court, I think it's ultimately theater to get a population to buy in and feel like they have a voice when they ultimately don't.
The checks and balances stuff is not actually a good part of the Constitution because the idea was that you have three co-equal branches of government and they'll check each other's power. That's what the idea was behind it. But it actually doesn't work out that way. It turns out that the three branches of government are not rivals. They're actually allies. Mm-hmm. So the fact that there's three co-equal branches and they all have sort of authority over each other, they check each other's power, it doesn't matter if they're all on the same side. Sorry, what?
There's a three-headed dragon.
Yeah, I mean,
right, exactly.
Like the ultimate checks and balances would be, people having access to any weapon that they'd want. and Bitcoin is the ultimate checks and balances because it eliminates the ability for the government, if used properly, for the government to steal all of our money. And then they can't be funded anymore. Like guns and Bitcoin, those are the checks and balances. But yeah, like Patrick's saying, Rothbard outlines this in his book Anatomy of the State, which is a great book, one of my all-time favorites. But imagine like there's you're playing a sports ball game, and the opponent is also the referees. Like that's what these the government checks and balances essentially. Like Patrick said, they're allies essentially against
I disagree, but in a funnier way. Like I'd say it's like the free market of tyranny where they're overriding each other to see who could be more tyrannical. Like you got the CIA, you got FISA courts, you got executive orders that go above like declaration of war, like how it's supposed to be. Like they're all competing to see who could be the most corrupt.
Oh, this is amazing.
Or Reuters, Facebook, and Pfizer.
Hey, I wanted to hop off, but unfortunately I saw that you just changed the title. The title is hilarious, so I kind of want to stay on. But I do have to get going, so I'm going to hop off, gentlemen. And good speaking with all of you.
Thanks for dropping in, Patrick. Yeah, and like when I look at the Constitution, any government that ever comes into authority, quote unquote authority, comes in through conquest, and it doesn't come in voluntarily. And I think that's the thing that is missing when we're taught U.S. history in school, is that they didn't go around and ask, permission. Ultimately, there was coercion from the very outset of the formation of the government, and it might have been a lot less than it is today. For certain people groups, for some people groups, it's pretty apparent that there was an immense amount of coercion. But that's the line that I draw for freedom is being able to experience and make decisions without coercion in my life. And so right now, the ultimate coercer is government, and in the future, there might be other coercers that come in, like violent gangs or whatever, and I would treat them the same way, because ultimately I don't believe in coercion, but that's just the way that I see it. I like this that you posted, Shishi. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty funny visual. It's like an orange circle, like a little tiny white line.
600 Bitcoin addresses out of 200 million are linked to white supremacists.
What's even better about that is that we can see. It's a very transparent thing that everybody can see. Can you see that with everybody's bank account?
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder how they came up with that. But pretty much, the reality is if you're a thinker that doesn't agree with authority, with the ruling class today, then you're a white supremacist. So.
Well, it just depends who you talk to, right?
Not even disagree. Like, it's like illegal to work. If you want to work and you want to just stay home and watch the TV or do what they tell you, then you're a white supremacist. Like, literally, doing construction work or driving a truck, illegal. You guys are white supremacists.
I need to get a truck horn for my soundboard. Then I could be a real white supremacist.
Bro, you just go mount one on your actual vehicle. Then you're living it.
Yeah, I need one for my Civic.
Dude, all you have to do is park in downtown to be a criminal oppressor of the state and a white supremacist. So just park your car, you know?
Yeah.
They'll come after you, bro.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. So Dread says in the chat, not sure how I can be a white supremacist. I'm not white. According to these people's definitions, it doesn't matter what your skin color is for you to be a white supremacist. I think, like, Larry Elder was running for governor of California, and he was a white supremacist. So,
Bro, Jesse Jackson sent Bitcoin to a trucker address on an exchange, and he is now a white supremacist.
Really? I mean, this.
I called. You want to hear a good story? I called Udi just another Israeli shitcoiner, and he called me a racist. And then I'm like, brother, I'm Israeli, so I don't know if that works in my book. I'm not part of that new era where, black people can be white supremacists or some shit. Like, so. But it was just funny because he went on a rampage, like screenshotting it and like tweeting it, and it was a good foray on Twitter. I loved it.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
I forgot he existed. Totally forgot about that dude. I think I'm like blocked and not even allowed to see his scammy shit.
I heard he was off of Twitter.
Is he? Yeah. I don't know.
I heard he sold it.
But I
didn't know he even existed.
This is the amazing thing about the cathedral burning and falling apart, is that these narratives just fall flat on their face. And I mean, for so long, that was the talking point, that you're an anti-Semite if you don't want to bomb Arabs. Like, and it's just so apparent to people. Like, they're just so uncreative with these things. And I think part of it is just kind of like, I don't even know about how much, calling people white supremacists is an actual attempt to shift public discourse, or it's just trying to demoralize and break people down.
I think you have that issue of like who controls the army, right? That's like one thing that the checks and balances kind of didn't do too well,
Yeah. And that's why the ultimate checks and balances is, like I said earlier, it's going to be Bitcoin, it's going to be encrypted communications, and it's going to be firearms. If
you really cared about the people of the world, everyone would just stop working until we stop sending drone bombs to random places. The thing is, it just feels like out of grasp because nobody really cares about the things that matter. They care about Web3 and fucking the metaverse. You know what I mean? It's like they care about their sports book and their where they're getting drinks on the weekend. Like, as far as it goes.
Yeah. Is now a good time to invest in Raytheon stock in Lockheed Martin?
No.
From a moral standpoint, absolutely not.
No, just from a pure capital standpoint, also not. You know, like it's just chasing any stocks right now is an interesting thing to do when Bitcoin's dipping. You know, it's like something I wouldn't do.
I agree. Welcome to the
stocks have to be extremely cheap and obvious for you to like foray. You know, try to stack some sats.
Oh, I'm just saying that because it seems like they're wanting to pump the defense budget with all this Russia bullshit. Welcome to the stage, Dread. How you doing tonight?
Pretty good, guys. Good to be here.
Our favorite white supremacist has arrived.
I gotta say, it's the weirdest feeling in the world because I come from not only a liberal family and background, but all my friends that I used to hang out with in Atlanta are still very progressive / liberal / under the thumb of hypnosis that they don't even understand or see. And it's kind of crazy just having conversations with them now and hearing the talking points that they're still using and still believing, and realizing that there is almost absolutely no way that I can convince them that what they believe is not true. Like it's literally like the cave. Like if they don't realize that they're in the cave, they're gonna fight to stay in there and never come out. And it's a game of patience for me at this point, where I just have to wait until one by one the remnant start showing their faces and say, you know what, this always felt like bullshit to me, and then I can have a real conversation with that person. But all the rest are still literally part of the system and literally fighting for it still.
That's for real. That's real. What's up, Dread? What's going on there, man?
What's up, Tarantula? Good to see you guys. Good to see everybody.
So, like, hey, that's funny you said that, man. Like, I've had a similar conversation with people. It's like you can lead the horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. And if you try too hard, you fucking drown him on purpose. It seems like it ends up creating animosity in individuals against you.
Yeah, and it ruins. The weird thing is, it ruins my reputation with that group. So even after they get over the hump, they cross the Overton window and realize that everything that they thought was bullshit is real, and everything they thought was real is bullshit. Even then, they still look at me as, oh, but you were that asshole that told me this in the first. Like, they still have animosity towards me, even though they realize now what the truth is. Like, that happened for Bitcoin.
Yeah, they resent you.
For the government. Yeah, they resent me for telling them the truth.
You were the one that opened their eyes and showed them the world's fucking ugly.
It's like being in a relationship, like being in a marriage, and someone tell you your wife's cheating on you, your husband's cheating on you, and you're like, well, fuck you for telling me, even though you got the divorce.
This is why I don't have any more friends in real life at all. Not a single one. Only the friends I know now are the ones I met here on the Bitcoin Twitter, and then I meet them at the conferences.
Yeah. I mean,
I once had to tell a friend of mine that his girl got railed by not one, not two, not three, but 4 people he knows. And we haven't really been friends ever since, but I had to tell him, four dudes I had to tell.
Important question is, was it at the same time?
Here's a question. You got her number?
Hobo, what's up, dog? Was it all at the same time or not?
Bruh.
You just put the fifth, bro. So
you send me her number?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I highlighted some people in the intro. I highlighted Oscar Schindler, Corrie ten Boom, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who were all pretty influential. History looks pretty fondly upon them, and they took tremendous risk to themselves. Dietrich Bonhoeffer dying in prison, Corey Ten Boom getting sent to a concentration camp for hiding Jews, and I think Schindler made it out okay. I can't remember the story 100%, but they took tremendous risk, and I think this is like, you know, there's definitely like, we have to overcome this base need for survival in these kind of insane totalitarian times of upheaval. And one of the ways to do that is like striving for meaning and purpose, and like valuing truth above all else, and like, you know, being ridiculed and looked at as stupid by, you know, friends and family is pretty shitty, and it's something, you know, I've experienced, and like Tarantula was talking about, I've cut a lot of those people out of my life, but I think it's incredibly important to have the conversations when they come up, and to not be silent, and to take, you know, meaningful action, you know, to fight this shit, because it's just so evil. And it's like everybody wants to be the good guy and the hero until they're put in the situation where, you know, they actually have to face them.
I'm with you on that front about not being, you know, hitting it with the violence and whatnot. But I mean, when you're the one that your words are quite literally the nails driven into the eyes that rip their lids open, you become perceived as violent. Like, as such, I had a conversation with a gentleman who was like, let's say, I want to say mid-60s. He was talking about his own father and everything, and the reasons why his father did stuff. And I said, like, you know, I brought it back down to the money. You know, told him that, look at what, you know, the things that your father did and everything. If you draw it back down to why the reasons that these military-industrial complex is rolling around the world and doing the things that they're doing, and you draw it back down to the money and everything, you know, we got down to a point where this man actually agreed that, yo, it is the money, and that the reasons and the things that his father fought for weren't actually the reasons and beliefs that his father thought he was there for. And out of nowhere, this guy got extremely hostile with me and got real upset and just pretty much kicked me out. Like, said, you gotta go, man. Like, I don't know, but I can't even talk to you right now. Like, I'm so fucking angry. And I was like, what? you serious? And he's like, yeah, you need to leave. And you know what? The whole thing started. It was peaceful conversation. Nobody ever raised their voice, never once. But quite literally, he saw the fucking truth of how his pop was sent this way and that way, and pretty much about got himself killed for a bunch of lies. And he was defending his father's honor for years and all kinds of other shit for reasons that, you know, he thought were legit. And it turns out they were lies. And hey, that is straight perceived as violence, my friend. Don't matter how friendly you bring the conversation, when you opening up the eyes of people and they aren't ready for it, you are perceived as violent. Doesn't matter. Unfortunately, that's just how it is.
Yeah. And I'm kind of like it with Ephesians on this one, where I think we're in, you know, this really intense warfare right now. And I don't think there's avoiding, like, if we're going to be living morally and with principles right now, I don't think there's a way to avoid conflict with people. I think there's ways to, you know, protect yourself and mitigate the risk. But this idea that somehow, you know, you can hunker down and ignore it and hide from it, I don't think is a reality that we can face.
Not unless you are already involved in a, let's call it a circular economy of choice.
Mm-hmm. But even still, like, I think it's going to come around one way, shape, or form. You know, because there's
because as a Bitcoin adoption grows, the chances that you're going to meet with somebody who does not share the same ideas that you have, and the chances that they're going to look to exchange goods and services with you for Bitcoin, they're going to grow. And so, you know, that's why Bitcoin is for everybody if it's going to work. You know, like, we're going to have to deal with people that we don't necessarily agree with, long and large at hand. It's just that's where it comes down to voting with your money. And that's why I don't particularly go to stores or restaurants or other things that I don't believe in or what they support, because that's how you choose your winners and losers. You vote with your money. So like when we see individuals and people who are doing ridiculous ass shit like we're seeing today, well, when it comes down to that ability to have that, circular economy, well, hopefully we can hope that those ridiculous individuals aren't being subsidized and zombified, by the money printer, because if they're not, we'll have the ability to shut that noise down by voting with our money.
Yes.
Yeah, and you'd also be surprised, like, who keeps that a secret, that they hold Bitcoin. Like, some store owners don't want anyone to know. So they're just stacking, but we don't know. The hidden based.
And that's one thing that has me really bullish, is how many NIMs are out there and people that aren't on Bitcoin Twitter that, I occasionally encounter. But there's a lot of people making decisions based off of incentives that really have their shit together and are doing some pretty powerful things. And like, this is the thing that I think, is really, bullish and hopeful, is that we've got these, cells of people everywhere that really believe in freedom, like real freedom without coercion, and are taking action. They might not necessarily be the most vocal or outspoken about it, but all of these people are acting simultaneously in a decentralized manner. And I think that's much more powerful than creating some sort of centralized movement that's going to inevitably be picked apart and co-opted, like we've seen in the past. I mean, you just look at the like the stores. There's so many places that I found in Tucson that didn't close during the initial lockdowns, that stayed open, that I didn't know about, and they didn't publicize because it puts a big target on your back. But they continued to, and I think that is powerful in and of itself, because it is ultimately assisting in the delegitimization of these tyrannical policies that the state's enforcing, because people are going and patroning that and seeing, we can act without having without the coercers coming and attacking us, and maybe we can do this in other places in our life too. Trying to think. I think I'm out of topics, guys. Anybody have any topics you want to talk, or should I end the stream and we'll just let the space devolve into chaos? Cool. All in the space. Thank you, or not the space, but the stream. Thanks for tuning into the stream tonight. 35th episode, Toxic Airwaves. We're going to be having a meetup tomorrow in Gilbert, which is up in the Phoenix area. It's a bar somewhere, I can't remember, and that's going to be dope. And then we're going to be having our Tucson meetup this upcoming Saturday, and so I'm pretty stoked. We're doing some pretty cool things in Arizona. Politicians here are shitcoiners, whatever. People are adopting Bitcoin and getting excited about it, doing these things that we talked about on the stream tonight, and it's awesome. So hope to see you there if you're in Arizona.